Hey guys, before we start things, I do have to address the fact that we are going to talk about some adult subjects very later on towards the end of this episode. It's nothing too serious, and I'll give you a time code so you can do your best to avoid them if you want to. Also, yeah, I wind up butchering a lot of these pronunciations. There is a pronunciation key in this book, but unfortunately, I did not have it with me, and so, with characters constantly named Telephus and Taltibus and every other thing, and it can get a little confusing sometimes. So, yeah, I did have to look at my notes while I was on camera, and that leads to kind of a clunky feeling, but it's the best I could do. Alright, let's start the show.
Previously on Age of Bronze, writer-artist Eric Shanauer set out to tell the tale of the Trojan War from a more historically literate perspective. Basically what that means is, while the Greek pantheon of deities and the various fantasy creatures that exist within their stories are mentioned, they don't actually have a physical presence in the story, much to the chagrin of centaur lovers everywhere.
Storyline-wise, an Anatolian youth named Paris discovered that he was the long-lost son of Priam and Hecuba, the rulers of the city-state of Troy. Quickly becoming the favorite child, the adoration goes to Paris' head, to the point that, when tasked with going out and retrieving Hecuba's sister Hesione, Paris instead used a stopover in Sparta to sweep Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, off her feet, claiming that in a dream the goddess Aphrodite approached Paris and offered Helen in exchange for a golden apple. Helen proceeded to leave with Paris, taking along several handmaidens and the daughter she had with Menelaus, Hermione, which Menelaus all took in stride.
This is Geek Town!
Menelaus then set out to retrieve Helen by first enlisting the aid of his brother, King Agamemnon of Mycenae. The two would then travel to the other city-states throughout Achaea, what they called ancient Greece back in the days, enlisting the aid of several other kings, most notably Ithaca's king Odysseus. However, they hit a snag when the Oracle of Delphi informed them the only way for an Achaean victory was to enlist the warrior Achilles as an aid.
Achilles was actually living on the island of Cycros as the adopted daughter of King Lycomedes. The facade was wearing thin, however, as Achilles had actually fathered a child, Lycomedes' daughter Deidamia. Still, Achilles had promised his mother Thetis that he would avoid war at all cost. However, the promise of glory proved too much to resist, and he wound up joining anyway.
As the Acheans are preparing to leave for Troy, Paris and Helen are actually arriving at the city-state's shores. This is Age of Bronze Volume 2, Sacrifice.
A group of Trojan shepherds is alerted to the presence of ships landing on the beach. Paris has returned after a brief detour in Sidon in Egypt where some villages were raided. That being said, he's returning Sam's Priam sister-in-law Hesione, which is what he originally set out to get. However, he's more than ready to display Helen just as soon as she decides on a wardrobe.
Women, am I right?
The two, along with the rest of the fleet, make their way towards Troy, only to run into Priam and Hecuba on the road there. It turns out that Paris' first mate Aeneas had run ahead to alert everyone to the arrival. Priam is intensely upset as Paris was dispatched to bring back Hesione, and he clearly has not done that, so no, he's not going to be allowed to just waltz right into Troy unannounced. Paris pleads with his parents, eventually pointing out that Helen is pregnant with the couple's second child.
Paris and Helen ultimately have 4 children. 3 boys named Aegenes, Buenos, and Idaeus, as well as a daughter who's also named Helen, which won't prove to be confusing in the slightest. Helen also had her daughter Hermione with Menelaus, however Hermione is traveling with Paris and Helen at this point. Now there were 3 sons of Menelaus named Athalios, Nicostrastos, Megapathon, and Pleistoces. However, it's believed that they were actually from mothers of Menelaus' harem. Yes, Menelaus had a harem because ancient times.
Paris and Helen's pleadings manage to sway Hecuba, who convinces Priam to allow the two into the city. Upon entry, a large party is thrown that lasts for 3 days and 7 nights. It can be heard all the way down at the Arby's on 10th Street. However, not everyone is having fun as Aeneas receives some bad news.
Aeneas was actually supposed to wed Priam's daughter Creusa. However, that contract has been nullified as Aeneas has taken the fall for Paris' not bringing back Hesione. So that means Aeneas and Creusa are actually slipping out under the cover of nightfall to elope. I'm sure this won't come back to bite anyone at any point.
Also not adding to the revelry is Priam's other daughter, the priestess Cassandra, who screams a vision of Troy being engulfed in flames upon seeing Helen. Cassandra turns to her twin brother Helenus, who's also said to receive prophetic visions, but he plays off any such ability. Cassandra is ignored and the party resumes, with Paris and Helen slipping away for some rooftop sex as the sun rises. Meanwhile, the assembled Achaean fleet makes their way towards Troy, only to be thwarted by a thick fog obscuring the shoreline. An overeager Achilles spots what he believes to be the identifying Hellas point of Troy. The fleet lands where they are greeted by a small group of people trying to point out that they've landed somewhere else.
This is actually another Anatolian city-state called Mysia, which is run by King Telephus, who claims to be a descendant of Heracles.
Unfortunately, Achilles is too blinded by thoughts of glory and immediately hurls a spear into the crowd. A battle breaks out as word is rushed back to Telephus, who turns down an offer from his wife Hera, a warrior princess herself, to join him in battle. Hera ignores her husband's order and winds up getting killed in an ambush. That being said, the Acheans are not having any type of upper hand, mainly because Odysseus and by extension Agamemnon have realized the mistake in their landing position and are not providing any form of backup. This leads to a loss of a major figure as Thersander of Thebes is killed by Telephus. Achilles and his friend Patroclus pursue Telephus into a vineyard where the king wounds Patroclus but winds up tripping on a vine, allowing Achilles to deliver a severe wound to the king's thigh. Before any killing blow can be struck, Achilles is driven back in the vineyard by reinforcements from the Mysian forces. He and Patroclus lay in the vineyard until nightfall, growing closer in some aspects. However, once they return to camp, they are immediately admonished by Agamemnon and Odysseus.
The next day, Acheans, Telepomus of Egypt, who's also a descendant of Heracles, and Chief Medical Officer Talthebus are sent to negotiate a truce with Telephus, namely by mending the king's wound.
In the end, Telephus will allow the Acheans to take time to recover, but then they have to leave. Also, he will not aid in any attack on Troy, as one of his wives is Priam's sister. Finally, Achilles apologizes as the Acheans prepare to return home to their individual city-states and regroup for an attack on Troy.
All except for Odysseus, who can't head back to Ithaca because Agamemnon needs him to help work on battle strategies.
Agamemnon returns home to his wife Clytemnestra and his daughters Iphigenia, Electra, and Chrysanthemis. However, the reception is far from warm as the pregnant Clytemnestra isn't exactly in the mood for any reunion sex. However, this isn't anywhere near as cold as the reception Achilles gets on his return to Skyros. He and Patroclus have grown closer over the months to the point that an old fashion from Diadema repulses Achilles. When Patroclus elects to leave, Achilles pursues them and the two end up running away together to Achilles' homeland of Thea. Lycomedes will not pursue unless Achilles surrenders custody of his son, Neoptolemus. Months go by, and Odysseus still can't go back to Ithaca, as Menelaus is chomping at the bit to get back to Troy, and Agamemnon is busy welcoming the birth of his son Orestes. That being said, Agamemnon agrees that more can be accomplished if the various city-states unite to reconstruct their fleets. This isn't as easy as it sounds, though, as many of the territorial rulers have settled back into normalcy. Finally, Odysseus hits on an idea. If Helen, formerly of Sparta, is said to be the most beautiful woman in the world, why not just sell everyone on the notion that they will get an up-close and personal look at her upon victory?
Man, ancient OnlyFans was weird.
This is all interrupted when a raving derelict storms the palace demanding to see Achilles. He reeks a foul odor and immediately grabs Orestes, threatening to sacrifice the child if he doesn't get what he wants. It's then that Agamemnon notices a large festering wound on the man's inner thigh and realizes that this is Telephus of Mysia.
Yes, the wound on Telephus' thigh has gotten infected, and it appears that infection has worked its way to his brain. As the Theban king says, an oracle told him that only the one who wounded him, Achilles, can heal him. Now, admittedly, Telephus is also blaming the fact that Theban warrior Thersander is buried on Mysia. Thersander was a descendant of Oedipus, and if you need a reminder of what that story is like, here it is.
Hey, Josephus! Hey, motherfucker!
Now, apparently, Telephus had a similar situation play out with one of his wives, but he stopped before the marriage was consummated. And he thinks his avoidance of this is what made the gods angry and cursed him with this wound.
Odysseus is immediately dispatched to Thea and thus cannot return to Ithaca in order to retrieve Achilles, who is receiving armor that his father claims was blessed by the gods. Achilles also winds up receiving a tongue lashing from his mother Thetis upon not keeping his promise to stay on Skyros and not be killed in war. With that in mind, she is now going to accompany Achilles to Troy just to prove that he's going to get killed in battle. Achilles and his growing entourage arrive in Mycenae and visit Telephus with absolutely no idea what to do, as none of them are doctors. Finally, Odysseus hits on the idea that the spear that caused the wound might be the answer, and scrapes some of the rust into Telephus's wound, which magically heals him.
Now, I should say here that we are recording what is basically legend and not necessarily fact, as I don't think there's any medical information out there as to what type of wound Telephus had or how this affection was working, as it seems like over this time he'd probably be dead at this point. So again, I'm not entirely sure how rust managed to cure bacteria.
In exchange for Achilles' actions, Telephus promises to guide the Acheans to Troy. He won't fight, though. He'll only direct them on the proper path. Unfortunately, not everything is all hunky-dory, as the fleet is unable to launch as a massive wind is whipped up in a direction that would wind up steering the ships away from Troy. Agamemnon's official soothsayer, Calchas, informs the king that the moon goddess Artemis demands repayment for a failed sacrifice. The payment is to be in the form of Agamemnon's eldest daughter, Iphigenia.
So that's why this volume is called Sacrifice. So basically the history here is that Agamemnon and Menelaus are the sons of another king named Arturus, who had to sacrifice one of his prized sheep in the name of Artemis, the moon goddess. However, he faked the sheep out, and it seems this curse has followed down the family line at some point. Yeah, we're starting to stray a little bit from literate history here, aren't we?
Agamemnon is aghast and spits in Calchas' face, refusing to kill his child. Eventually, though, Menelaus and Odysseus point out that the men are getting restless, and if they do not launch now, they never will and are going to look like big idiots. Agamemnon tearfully relents and sends a message to Clytemnestra saying that Achilles wishes to marry Iphigenia before leaving, so bring her to the port. A couple of days later, however, Agamemnon has a change of heart, attempting to have a scribe Achelous smuggle a cancellation message out of the camp. The message is intercepted by Menelaus, who confronts his brother. While all of this has been under the guise of rescuing Helen from Troy, really this is all about Agamemnon making a power grab to rule all of Greece. And it turns out he really can't fully return on this, as again, this is going to doom all of Achaea. None of that really matters, however, as the sunrise brings Iphigenia's arrival along with Clytemnestra and the rest of the royal family. After all, why would a mother miss her daughter's wedding? Agamemnon tries to be coy, talking vaguely about a sacrifice needed to be done before the wedding, only for Clytemnestra to demand to speak with Achilles for approval. The two begin arguing over Clytemnestra's normally expected presence at her daughter's wedding, and eventually Agamemnon just storms off.
As this is happening, the troops are getting restless as to when they're actually going to launch, and it's then that they spot a rabbit being feasted on by two eagles. This causes Calchas to start having a vision about the sacrifice and explaining what it is, though the troops aren't exactly sure as to what exactly it is Calchas is talking about, and just think that it's Agamemnon losing command here, and so now they're beginning to mutiny.
When Achilles arrives at the royal quarters, he finds Clytemnestra reading the smashed message tablet that Menelaus was holding, containing the notification about Achilles canceling the wedding. Clytemnestra's constant questioning about why he's walking out on her daughter causes Achilles to realize that Iphigenia is going to be sacrificed by Agamemnon. Horrified, she pleads with Achilles to thwart her husband's plan. Later, she angrily confronts Agamemnon, who breaks down, admitting that he doesn't want to kill Iphigenia, but the war needs him to. Finally, Iphigenia steps out and says for the good of the many she'll go through with the sacrifice, and all of this gets reinforced when Achilles returns bleeding after the other troops stoned him to death as they're ready to mutiny at this point. Despite Clytemnestra's repeated protestations, Iphigenia leaves with Agamemnon and is taken up a hill where all witness a sacrifice as the moon rises. Achilles attempts one more time to intercede, only to be held back as Iphigenia's head is cut off. As her blood stains the ground, the winds that have been holding the fleet back have stopped. The Acheans will set forth for Troy in the morning.
And I'm sure absolutely none of this is going to come back to bite Agamemnon on the ass. Well, that concludes Age of Bronze Volume 2, Sacrifice. How was it? Well, again, I do think there's some really good artwork throughout all this story, and there is actually kind of like some dark humor in this too, particularly with Odysseus trying to get back to Ithaca only for it to be thwarted at the last possible minute. It does seem like Agamemnon just can't seem to do much on his own. On the downside, though, this story is just padding. We get the Trojans, Paris and Helen, very early on, and then they just vanish for the rest of the story. We follow the Acheans. So, yeah, I kind of wish maybe we had bounced back to there. It could have helped liven things up a little bit. Also, there's a lot of scenes of just people talking. Like, there's some battle scenes early on, but after that, it's just people standing around and talking and talking and talking and talking. And that can get kind of dry after a while. And added to that, skip to here if you want to avoid anything triggering. Okay? But yeah, there's some dialogue about essay in this. It's not detailed or anything. There's no artistic depictions of it. But like I said, there's some dialogue from characters in this where they talk about, excuse me, how being assaulted on a regular basis, made them better generals and tougher men. And it's like, and I understand this was historically common at that time, but yeah, it's just maybe not the best thing to try to read through. Okay, hopefully that part, the disturbing part's over. I won't touch on it again. But yeah, overall, this book just has kind of a fillery feel to it. It's not bad, but I have to give it a C in that you basically only have to read this if you're trying to read the entire Age of Bronze series. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can help support the channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcat productions. There you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. And as always, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell